Hey guys, welcome back. I have a response video for you this week. This one is a response to Jeffrey Miller talking about how psychiatry is a mess, something I discuss a lot on this channel. I mean, the thrust of this video is me reacting to this guy saying the same things that I say in a little bit different way. We don't have the same idea of the solution to this problem of psychiatry being a mess. Generally, we do. He does agree that philosophy is a part of it. He's going to talk about that in concept clarification. Oh boy. But he also talks about behavior genetics and evolutionary psychology. While I do think those have a place, he's coming at more from like the research scientist perspective, where I'm thinking about it more of a therapeutic. How do you actually apply psychology in the clinic? And I was very much, thinking about it from his perspective too, just from the research scientist perspective. But then you start working with people and you realize, oh, the point of clarifying these terms and making psychiatry or psychology not a mess is so, we can help people through their emotional issues so we can get to the moon and launch rockets from the moon. I mean, that's the point. Launch spaceships from the moon. I know the moon's not real, but that's what I think the goal is. Ultimately, I know that sounds crazy, but he offers a good perspective here. This guy, he's the best that academia has to offer. He's been a big influence on me. I read Made Mind when I was in college. It really helped me think about things in a new way, like the Selfish Gene did very much. Very similar to that. And I even think, after watching this video, when I was preparing to do this, I remember like, oh, I think I may have even gotten my definition of emotions from him by something that he says in this video. Maybe not word for word, I think of it as a mode of operation. It's this state that our brain goes into to achieve a certain outcome, not even a benefit. It can be a benefit, but at least a certain outcome. I think I may have gotten that from him, or at least the idea from him, and perhaps the Mating Mind. Anyway, he's going to make some interesting points here. Let's see what he has to say.
Psychiatry is a mess. Over the years, I've done little research on mental disorders from an evolutionary perspective, a field called evolutionary psychopathology, or Darwinian psychiatry. About 10 years ago, I was invited to write a foreword to a book on the philosophy and science of mental illnesses, edited by Peter Adrians and Andreas de Block for Oxford University Press. The book, Maladapting Minds, was published in 2011. And included 11 chapters by leading researchers such as Randy Nesse, Martin Brune, Jerome Wakefield, and Daniel Nettle. Here's what I said in that foreword.
Yeah, Maladapting Minds. I mean, it totally shook the book industry, and everybody read it, right? I know the opposite. It's a $100 textbook that nobody reads. It's just one of the problems. This is not Jeffrey Miller's fault. It's just clearly one of the problems with academia. I mean, part of the problem with this video, like, dude, what are you doing? You're just reading. I mean, he's just going to read his introduction to that book here. I mean, it's just very symbolic of the disconnect between academia and everybody else. It's like, you're just not using mediums well, You don't come on YouTube and just read an introduction. I don't want to criticize Jeffrey Miller too much because he's, I really look up to him, and I think you can just tell by the way he talks. He's obviously very intelligent. I mean, it's like annoyingly intelligent the way he talks. It's like, you know what it is? It's like a Ebonics for white people. That's how he's talking. It's like, I know you're English, but I can't really understand. Or, you go to the deep south, like somebody who lives in Louisiana, like on bogs, people who live on bogs or marshes, the way they talk. Like, I know you're speaking English. I really can't understand what you're saying, though. I'm going to translate his white people Ebonics here. That's another thing I'm doing in this video. All right, continuing.
Psychiatry is a mess. Nobody seems to know how to distinguish normal behavior from mental disorders, or how to treat most mental disorders.
Yes, because how we distinguish normal behaviors from mental disorders is just what's the outcome, what's the immediate outcome, or what's the prevalence in a population. If the prevalence is high enough, then I guess it's not a disorder. I guess it's not a dysregulated emotion. Like, there's no principles besides, well, what's everybody else doing? That's not a principle. Okay. Whew.
nobody seems to know how to integrate cutting-edge science, experimental psychopathology, community comorbidity studies, brain imaging, genome-wide association studies, multivariate behavior genetics, into a profession whose basic terms, concepts, empirical standards, professional institutions, funding sources, and intervention methods are all decades old. There are
okay, so do you see what he said there? Yeah, I'm translating it's ivory onyx, I guess. I guess it would be onyx. But he's talking about, brain imaging, multivariate behavioral genetics, community comorbidity. I mean, those last two, those really are important for therapy. It's important for psychology, maybe understanding what psychology is. And it's good to understand that some of these issues that we have are indeed genetic. Like alcoholism, though there's really no alcoholism gene. It's just, a temperament that makes you more likely to be an alcoholic when you don't take care of yourself psychologically, let's just say. And part of that can be, based on childhood trauma and whatnot. But the brain imaging, I do think the brain imaging is important. That's what we talk about here, especially the connection between the cortex and the limbic system, the amygdala, the hippocampus. We do know a bunch about that, and that seems to have, not everything, but that seems to be a huge part of emotional regulation. How those two parts of the brain that evolve for two different purposes, we could argue how they connect, literally. How they connect. And, I don't think brain imaging is advanced enough where we can just go off of brain imaging, but if you develop a theory of psychology, if you define fundamental terms on which psychology needs to be based, it definitely cannot disregard any results we get from brain imaging. So I think that's a very good point. All right.
Strong, angry, and unresolved debates over how to revise the 5th edition of Psychiatry's core reference work, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, DSM-5, to be published in 2013. There are continual tensions between research psychiatrists and clinical psychiatrists.
He's going to talk about the tensions between the field, but really it's an ideological tension. And I remember that because, I was in grad school in 2013 when that book came out. And whenever anybody talked about that, the release of the DSM-5, it was everything everybody said about it was preluded with a discussion about the fights in the room where everybody was, where they were coming up with these different diagnoses. And what would you expect? Right? It's not about different professions or different professions within the grand field, I guess you could say, of psychology or psychiatry. It's about different perspectives. We can't define our terms, let alone come to agreement with somebody else in the field about what a term is. And on top of that, you don't even know that's the issue. You don't even know you're supposed to define terms in the first place, because where's the philosophy? You have no philosophical training. You think philosophy is just staring at your navel, which it is, and that's a fun part of it, but that's not everything. It's classic. It's classic unconscious incompetence. You don't know, and you don't know that you don't know. And then what we get in the DSM-5, it's not a theory of anything. It's just a list of things that you see and a list of symptoms of each diagnosis that you see. No relation. There's very little relation. It's just an assumed relation, like, what axis 2 versus axis 3, whatever it is. But it's very broad relation that's really not that helpful. And you don't know. And yeah, I just, now I'm being re-traumatized because I remember the most insufferable people in grad school, they bought the DSM. They bought it when it came out, and they would carry it around with them to class. Like, oh God, this is for insurance companies. This is for lawyers. This is for insurance companies to make some stupid claim that's not based on reality, because you can't even define your terms right. There's no clear concepts. Continuing.
Psychiatrists and clinical psychologists, and between mental health professionals and health insurers. Evolutionary psychiatry promised to bring order to this chaos. In its 2-decade history, it has made good progress in clarifying some terms, such as disorder, normal, defense, and emotion, It has yielded new insights into some mental
emotion.
disorders,
Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
notably depression, autism, phobias, anorexia, and psychopathy. It has promoted a bit more cross-fertilization among psychiatry.
Did you see what he said there? He said it, evolutionary psychiatry or psychology can explain why we have terms like depression, anorexia, psychopathy. That's not really true. It explains how these could be advantageous evolutionarily, but it really doesn't explain why we have them. And I think you're going to see a little bit lapse in Jeffrey Miller's philosophical thinking because he is, he's a materialist empiricist, which is the best academia has to offer right now. Your choice, at least in the soft sciences, is to be either that or SJW woke guy. So he's going to, I think, miss some concepts, but, not really understanding where these things come from. Just because something could possibly be, you can come up with a just-so story of how something could be advantageous evolutionarily, doesn't really explain why we have them, or doesn't explain how we interact with our emotions to aggravate or ameliorate these conditions that we may, in fact, be born with. Right. Obvious example, it's totally understandable why neuroticism would be evolutionary advantageous, and we can look at groups of people who have been at war for hundreds of years recently, like Native Americans, the Indians, and Scottish people. And it's alcoholism is going to be higher in those groups, but that really doesn't explain why one person in particular is an alcoholic. It doesn't. That's one factor, and it would explain why they're more likely to be an alcoholic, but that doesn't really explain why they have the alcoholism in the first place. I just want to point that out. That's a point that he misses here. But whatever, nobody's perfect. I have not read everything that Jeffrey Miller has written, but I just recommend it. It's going to make you smarter. Okay, continuing.
Evolutionary psychology, behavior genetics, and biological anthropology. Yet it has left the bulk of psychiatry untouched. Why has evolutionary psychiatry's impact been so limited, despite the impeccable Darwinian logic of basing the study of mental disorders on the study of evolved mental adaptations? There are the usual suspects.
Okay, so just to translate the ivory onyx here, you understand what he's saying? He's talking about how psychiatry is a mess and evolutionary psychology / psychiatry is supposed to come in and provide some foundational principles to organize the mess. And it kind of did, and it is a helpful way of looking at things, but it also didn't. And why is that? He's going to make a few good points here, but he's going to miss one major point. I think you know what I'm going to say if you watched 2 seconds of any of my videos, but all right.
Individual and institutional conservatism, the pre-Darwinian state of most medical school curricula.
Yeah, that's true.
The vested interests of big pharma, the peculiarities of the American health insurance system.
Peculiarities. There's a euphemism for you. Peculiarities. Yeah, how about the fact that they're not even companies? It's just their government. They're just an extension of the government. I mean, fascism runs our health insurance companies. It's just, when people say we gotta, health insurance companies are corrupt because they're private, we gotta socialize them. They already are. They're not socialized, they're fascistized, and you're just gonna make them socialized? Okay. Anyway, sorry to rant about politics there. Continuing.
Vicious cycle between DSM categorizations and funding categories for research grants.
Yeah.
And the disappointments of psychiatric genetics, and the mindless but well-funded stampede towards neuroscience.
Yeah, the disappointment of psychiatric genetics, i.e. genetics doesn't explain everything. I mean, it explains predispositions, but it doesn't really explain why you're there in the clinic with your issue. It doesn't. What we're talking about here is consciousness. And that's what guys like Jeffrey Miller, as smart as he is, he doesn't see it. It's not that he isn't smart. I mean, listen to him. He's a lot smarter than I am. But does he have the right philosophical perspective? No, I think he's just baked into this materialist, consequentialist, utilitarian. I mean, I mean, the guy's an effective altruist, wow. But that would make sense from his, philosophical perspective. Oh, I know the problem with altruism. It's just not effective enough. It's just, okay. Where was I going? I was just ranting about something. Dude, I think I just had a stroke. Well, let's continue. Maybe I'll remember it.
No doubt, these account for much of evolutionary psychiatry's limited impact.
Oh yeah, so yeah, evolutionary psychiatry, it explains why we evolved to consciousness, but it doesn't help us deal with consciousness. Maybe that's part of the reason. We gotta look at consciousness. Because psychology only matters to the extent that we have free will, whatever extent that is. Otherwise, it just doesn't matter. Otherwise, yeah, we can just do multivariate behavioral genetic studies and that's going to solve everything. Well, it's not. It's going to look at predispositions, and then, guys like Gabor Mate will get on and talk about you have problems because of how you were raised, and that's just it. It doesn't really explain anything, Anyway. Yeah, I really try to shoehorn in Gabor Mate diss. Someone who I have much less respect for than Jeffrey Miller. Jeffrey Miller knows what he is, right? And he does it very well. Gabor Mate, he doesn't know what he is, right?
Yet there may be deeper conceptual problems in evolutionary psychiatry. This is where
really?
philosophy might...
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm getting too excited. I'll let him talk. Let me go back a few seconds. This is important.
Of evolutionary psychiatry's limited impact. Yet there may be deeper conceptual problems in evolutionary psychiatry. This is where philosophy might promote evolutionary psychiatry's progress and impact as a science. Modern philosophy...
Do you see what he's talking about? Conceptual problems that can only be solved through philosophy. Conceptual, i.e., we need to define our terms. That's what he's talking about here. Thank you. See, this is what I'm doing in this video. See how smart he is? This is what I've been talking about. I'm not saying I'm as smart as him, but maybe this gives me some credit. Really, the whole point of this video is very sad, and clearly it goes back to validation issues I have. But continuing.
I think aims to analyze and clarify the terms, concepts, findings, and standards of evidence relevant to some particular domain of human discourse. Psychiatry is one domain of human discourse with especially high stakes, such as trying to prevent suicide, rape, murder, despair, psychosis, and other forms of avoidable suffering.
Not having a girlfriend, procrastination, not getting to the GDFing moon so we can colonize the galaxy. I know, I'm crazy.
Following Nietzsche's demolition of grand philosophical systems, whether metaphysical, moral, or epistemological, much philosophy has become applied
not really what
philosophy
Nietzsche did,
of
but
some sort, philosophy
enough,
of subject X, rather than philosophy, capital P, as an autonomous subject. So, at its best, philosophy of science is pretty humble in its aspirations. And
I'm sorry, I got to say something about Nietzsche. He said that Nietzsche disabused us of grand philosophical systems. No, he disabused us of the ones that have come before. He tried to create his own. Eternal return was not a system, but a grand philosophical principle. He didn't try to get rid of philosophy altogether, philosophical systems. Okay. Continuing.
Methods. It largely means reviewing and critiquing scientific literatures with an eye towards unexamined assumptions, unclear concepts, slippery terms, internal contradictions, cultural prejudices, and historical amnesia. All of these problems are endemic to mainstream psychiatry.
So what he's saying there is the way that research scientists can philosophize now is through literature reviews, but they just kind of slapdash these together and to get on to something else.
And remain fairly common in evolutionary psychiatry. Philosophy strives to do this concept clarification work in a mindful, ruminative, deliberate, historically informed way,
Epistemology, that's how you do it. It's an important topic. That's why I don't shut up about it. Exactly.
In contrast to the slapdash theorizing of many working scientists.
Oh, I just got slapdashed because I was preparing. I don't usually use slapdash. When I use that, I'm like, why did I use that? Oh, yeah, because he uses it in this video. Okay, that's funny.
Who see literature reviews as onerous burdens to be finished quickly before the fun work of reporting methods and results in scientific papers.
Yeah, so much fun.
Insofar as philosophers gain specialist training in thinking clearly, debating sharply, knowing history, identifying counterexamples, and chasing implications imaginatively, they bring something useful and distinctive to science.
So I do that.
This book, Maladapting Minds, is a good example. Although half of the chapters are written by non-philosophers, most authors adopt the philosophical stance in relation to their particular issues. Of the 11 chapters after the introduction, some address general issues such as the nature of harmful dysfunctions, mechanistic versus evolutionary views of dysfunction, defenses versus disorders, generality versus modularity, and the role of mythology in psychiatry. Other chapters focus on particular disorders, 4 on depression and 1 each on phobias, sexual fetishes, autism, and schizophrenia. Yet, even these disorder-specific chapters strive to gain insights that can be applied to other disorders, such as the difference between normally and abnormally regulated emotions, the interplay of evolved preferences and individual experience, and the differences between ancestral and modern environments.
Well, that doesn't matter so much. I mean, I just want to, say that. The difference between modern and ancestral environments, it just concerns application. It just concerns how we get our needs met in a particular context. It doesn't really define it doesn't really change our needs, and generally, unleashing psychic energy from which we can go on and get our needs met. It's just in different contexts of how we get our needs met. It's going to be a little bit different, but the principle behind them is the same. So I don't know if that matters that much, but see what he's saying. He's just saying, they're analyzing, even in this book, they're analyzing these different disorders, but they're not really connecting the dots between the two. Okay.
Philosophers often look for such cross-domain generalizations, where concept clarifications in one domain can be exported to other domains.
Ding, 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 ding. You see that? I mean, that's exactly what the concept clarification in one domain clears up concepts in another domain. And that's a very good indication that you have at least a decent enough theory of how a field is, because you can clear up concepts about one thing and it has far-reaching impact that you didn't really see. So when you look at, for example, dysregulated emotion and how we do that and how we can make different decisions, conscious, unconscious, otherwise, with our emotions, how this can lead to something like irrationality. And so now you're talking about something that you're doing in the psychological realm, and you realize, this helps define a term that philosophers have been using without much foundation for hundreds of years. Irrationality. What is it? Where does it come from? Now, why does it come about? You can't just say irrationality. It doesn't really explain anything. But when you explain what irrationality is in psychology, let's say when you defined it, when you say it's when, first we need to look at what an emotion is, how it works, and then irrationality is doing this with the emotion. And these are going to be the outcomes of doing that. And I can explain it based on what emotion is and how it works. Then we can export this term, as he says, to another field like philosophy and maybe even certain philosophical systems that are based on irrationality. Make a lot of sense. This is not a philosophical system. You're just stuck in this emotional loop. You're rationalizing this emotional loop, which is what Nietzsche was saying, as he was saying before, but just get a little bit more explicit with it. There we go. That's really important. And even on a smaller scale, you can look at maybe how borderline and narcissism are similar. even though they're two different things in the DSM-5. They're two different things, but you can kind of see how they're similar. You can look at the principle that leads to borderline also leads to narcissism and why there is overlap between the two. Okay. Thank you for validating who I am, Jeffrey Miller. Continue.
As working scientists are usually more concerned with getting the theory right in just one domain. Also, throughout all chapters, it is clear that the philosophy of
I'm just going to skip ahead here to he's going to talk about the science versus intuition, and well, you see what he has to say, which doesn't go long enough, so let's skip ahead.
Concerns science versus intuition. Philosophy can go wrong when it tries to reconcile our human intuitions about some domain with the technical concepts and findings in that domain.
Right.
This often proves impossible.
Yeah.
Philosophers of physics have learned that our intuitive physics lay concepts of time.
Did he just sigh? Is he boring himself? I mean no ill will. I don't feel intimidated too often, thankfully. I've been in therapy long enough where I don't do that. But I could imagine if I was over at his house for dinner, especially since he's married to Diane Fleshman, somebody else who I think is, it's just like a big brain couple. I mean, whatever, they're weird and stuff, but I could see me going over there for dinner and just trying to be smarter than I am. Trying harder than I usually try. I'm just saying, I don't want to. I'm making fun of him. I don't want it to seem like I don't like qualifying this too much. Now it's just, I'm protesting too much, but I just want to make it. I have a lot of respect for the guy. I am making fun of him. He is ridiculous. It wouldn't be ivory onyx, because it's not ebony onyx. It'd just be Ive onyx. His Ive onyx is ridiculous, but I don't know.
Time, space, gravity, and impetus are impossible to reconcile with core ideas in relativity, quantum mechanics, and cosmology.
Yeah.
Philosophers of biology have learned that our intuitive biology, our lay concepts of species essences and teleological functions, are impossible to reconcile with evolutionary population genetics and adaptationist teleonomy.
Yes, that's a
Even
good
moral
point.
philosophers such as Peter Singer are doubting whether our intuitive morality, self-deceptive, nepotistic, clannish, anthropocentric, and punitive as it is, can be reconciled with any consistent set of moral values, whether deontological.
Yeah, talking about Peter Singer, I don't have to go into that, but Peter Singer, effective altruism, utilitarian consequentialism, nobody's perfect.
Logical, consequentialist, or virtue ethical. Yet, philosophers of psychiatry still often make the argument that if some principled new way to think about mental illness has implications that seem intuitively unacceptable, the new idea must be rejected as absurd. For example, the view of mental disorder.
For example, I'll take it from here, Dr. Miller. For example, you see what he's saying? So if we have findings, if we come up with like philosophical principles for a field, if we understand a field in a new way, and the consequences of those principles lead somewhere that doesn't make sense intuitively, you don't just throw out the findings, in favor of your intuition. There are insights that are often contrary to our intuition, is what he's saying. Kind of like maybe some of these. You see where I'm going with this, right? Kind of like, some of these findings may say that, hey, you know how we approach therapy thinking that everybody is different and everybody is this unique special flower, and therapy with one person is going to be totally different than therapy with another person. You have to adapt to each client. Maybe everybody's the same. Maybe everybody, in fact, because they're the same, because we have the same emotions. Yes, we experience those emotions differently as feelings in an infinite array of feelings, but fundamentally they all come from the same emotions and the decisions we make or fail to make with those emotions. everybody's the same, and everybody's therapeutic process will be the same, will be fundamentally the same. And what this means is maybe the deafness, the skill of the therapist is mostly inconsequential to the success of the therapy. And maybe that's part of the reason why we have this mental health crisis, is because we think that the therapist you go to matters so much, and you have to find a therapist like you're finding a girlfriend. Like you have to find somebody who has the right vibes. Well, it's going to take forever, and you're probably going to quit in your search, and by the time you quit, the acute situation that had you go to therapy in the first place is past. The fundamental issue is still there. Maybe that's one of the reasons why we have some kind of mental health crisis. And maybe these findings will show that while group therapy is a small percentage of the therapeutic process, now it's like maybe 5%, maybe it needs to, and one-on-one therapy is 95%, maybe that needs to be flipped. Maybe the one-on-one therapy just needs to be 5%, while the group therapy is where the majority of the transformation is. You go to one-on-one therapy to figure out exactly what's going on and exactly where your issues come from. What misstep you make emotionally, how specifically you dysregulate emotions, how to talk through that in a healthy way for you, that it will be individual specific. And then from there, once you figure that out, you just go to group therapy to continue the transformation and to remind yourself of what ultimately matters, of what matters in therapy, which is understanding your pattern, understanding how to talk through it, and then coming up with some kind of ritual you can go through to just keep constant pressure on this. And going to group, being 95% of the therapeutic process, just helps, in part, it helps to remind you of what's going on. And maybe even the therapist participates in the group, which implies, right, like how 95% of the therapy, it's group. What does that imply? Same thing that the therapist participating in the group implies, which is the therapist is not your resource. The therapist is there to define terms and what's going on for you and to help you see that for yourself. Obviously, you're the one who really needs to see it and put it in your own words. But after that, the therapist is not the resource at all. And really, the therapist is simply a way to convey, a way to help you figure out these ideas on your own, or figure out how the principles of psychology and therapy apply to you specifically, which you could probably do on your own. It just goes a lot faster with a therapist. So instead of taking 2 years, we could do it maybe in, honestly, 2 sessions. We'll do more than that just to make sure, but we can do it in 2 sessions. Right? The therapist is not the resource. You are your own resource. And you see that by going to group and talking through these issues in a particular way. And then from there, well, I don't even have to talk about what happens from there. That's clearly not the end point, because the end point is you don't change how you talk in therapy. That's pointless if that's all you did. But you parlay that into, and if you talk about your issues in therapy well enough, you can parlay that into talking about your issues in the rest of your life and being open, honest, and transparent, and how this frees up your ability to take action and bring awareness to that action. It's like, oh, what's the point of therapy? No, the point of therapy, like, how's this help me in my real life? No, the point is it frees up your emotional baggage, so you're more likely to take action. You're more likely to have healthy awareness of the action you do take. Was the action a success? That's awareness. Was it a failure? That's awareness. And now you iterate. And you use that awareness and you iterate and you take more action. And like success, whatever success means to you, it's not some magic thing that just some people have. Like some people have the genetics for success and some people don't. It's just natural process, and you begin to realize, oh, success is the natural state. When I was unsuccessful in whatever domain, whether with my family, whether with women, or with money, of course, I was, in fact, my issues were getting in the way of that. And that served a particular purpose for me. And now I see that because of, I applied these first 2 principles to therapy. And then, from here, I know this is very unpopular, but this is totally true. Maybe from here we realize that therapy isn't for everybody. It's not for everybody. If you don't have a 115 IQ, it's probably not for you. There's other things for you. It doesn't mean you're a worse person morally or anything like that. There's 12-step. There's religion. I mean, obviously, if you're smart, you can find a lot of help from 12-step or religion. But it's like anything else. I mean, so what? I mean, that sounds like such a controversial thing to say, but starting a business isn't for everybody. It doesn't mean you're worse if you aren't entrepreneurial in some way. It doesn't mean you're worse off or you're a worse person or you're morally less than. I mean, that's ridiculous. You can still benefit from the people who start businesses. You know, same thing with music. I mean, not everybody, I don't know if you have to be smart to make music, but I don't think you can be dumb. I'm not smart enough to make the music that, Beethoven makes or, let's be honest, Guns N' Roses. That's what I mostly listen to. But I can still enjoy it. You may not be smart enough to really take on the task of therapy, but you can still enjoy, being around people who are emotionally literate and transparent in a healthy way, who are, in fact, incredibly emotional, though you would never use that term emotional to describe them. In fact, the reason maybe why we have a pejorative around emotional is because people who really aren't smart enough, or at least aren't able to grasp the foundational issues of psychology, try to be emotional, and it just comes off as sad. It's like when people who aren't smart enough to make music try to make music, and it comes off as it just becomes their ska band. And if all you knew was a ska band, you would say, oh God, I hate music. Oh wait, you have to have a trombone in a rock and roll band? Oh, this is terrible. Maybe what you would learn, maybe one of these insights that are contrary to our intuition, what we would learn is, the nature of psychological research is bogus right now. We don't have the technology to really define constructs well enough. One particularly well-defined construct, however, that I just use is IQ. We have that. Nobody wants to look at that as a viable construct because we have all this baggage around it, but maybe a lot of our constructs aren't. We just don't have the technology to do a lot of psychological research yet. It's fine. Doesn't mean we can't. There's philosophy. That's why we have philosophy. This is why we have Aristotle. This is why we have what Jeffrey Miller's talking about in this video. Conceptual understanding of a field before you can really, get some gravy out of it. Whatever that means. And of course, one of these insights that are going to be contrary to intuition is the realization that, the main paradigm or hegemony or one of those 90s words in psychology right now in therapy is CBT, which when you understand what psychology is, it is in fact not therapy. It is glorified self-help. It is by definition not therapy. Which I'm not saying you can't get any help from it, but also any help you do get will just be orthogonal to what CBT is. Just like, because it's going to most likely long term when you apply these principles, it's going to hurt you. Meaning, yeah, you can get help from CBT just because you're going somewhere to talk with a therapist, but that doesn't mean it's the CBT that's helping you. Thank you guys. I'll leave it there. I have an announcement to make. I'm going to start a free group. I announced it on Twitter last week. It's just going to be a Zoom room with me. You're going to come in. I'm going to do a 5 to 10 minute presentation on sticking points that are, typically come up in therapy. Sticking points that come up in the process of therapy. And I think I'm just going to do like a quick little talk, 5 to 10 minute presentation. I might use the whiteboard in the Zoom room if I really need to. And then from there, just show up. No registration or anything. We're not going to do it. I just want to keep this as simple as possible. You just show up, you click on the link, you show up, and you can listen to me talk, or you can just show up when I'm done talking if you don't want to listen to what I have to say and just ask questions about something else, and I'll try to answer them the best way I can. So I think I just want to, I don't know, I think that might be a good resource for you guys. So, and I'd be happy to do it. It'd be a lot of fun for me. So, best of both worlds there. And I had something else I wanted to say. I forget. But I'm going to do that. And depending on how that goes, maybe I'll post it on YouTube. So if you don't show up, you can at least see the questions and see what I have to say about these sticking points. So that might be another fun video. We'll see how it goes. And if it doesn't work out, that's fine too. Thank you guys. I definitely recommend, again, Jeffrey Miller, anything that he's, like I said before, anything that he's written. He's promoting, he's back here. He was promoting, his new book, Virtue Signaling. I haven't read it. I'm sure it's interesting. I recommend you go read that. Go read Mating Mind, and I wish you all the pain and joy that comes from I'm exhausted. Thank you. But let's just end this video. Thanks, guys. I'll talk with you next week.